The virtual CISO moment is brought to you by vCISO Services, a leading provider of quality and experienced virtual chief information security officers for small and mid-sized businesses. Check them out at vcisoservices.com. Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment. Bill Butler joins us today. He is a vice president of engineering with a demonstrated history in the hospital and healthcare and security compliance industry, and is the VP of Engineering and founder of PolicyCo. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd like to start, as we usually start on the podcast, if you could talk a little bit about how you got into IT, why you got into IT and InfoSec, and just kind of step through your career progression to the point where the why and the how you founded PolicyCo and where all that's going.
Sure. Well, I stumbled into technology in high school and college. I'm old, so we pretty much from a very young age, I was interested in just computers, bulletin boards, technology.
Bulletin boards, haven't heard that in a long time.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm old. And so so with some friends of mine after college, we started up an internet service provider in Nashville. It was called Telelink, and really kind of learned trial by fire. We had a handle on, FTP, Gopher, those sorts of things, and then a web browser came out, and we decided, wow, this is pretty exciting, and we ended up bringing a line to Nashville, setting up modems, advertising in the Nashville scene, if you remember that backboard, and gaining customers through that. And so really got a lot of our, chops in terms of pipes and Unix systems and that sort of thing at a pretty young age. We were in our early 20s, and built a business there, and kind of decided, and maybe a decade later, we had some success there, and a decade later decided that these things were sort of becoming commoditized with Comcast and these large pipes coming out. And so really, I ran two different ISPs, and eventually pivoted into software, the software side of things, and got into software development. Quickly found that healthcare seemed to be in the greatest need of software developers who were doing things that were a little bit more modern in their approach, could do things a little bit faster. So I got involved with a company called Advent Health Partners as their VP of engineering, and helped them develop a product called Cabo, which services hospitals and insurance companies in claims adjudication. But along that path, obviously security became a major concern, because we have a lot of patient data, very detailed. So we had HIPAA regulations that we needed to be beholden to. SOC 2 became a need as well, just for business continuity and high trust. And so the three of those together, it's funny, as the VP of engineering, you don't really realize how much you have to start to learn about compliance. Because if you're a new company and you don't have the skill set necessarily, you don't have a dedicated resource for compliance, it kind of falls on the engineering teams and the IT teams to sort of figure it out, at least in the beginning, until you have a more mature program. So I was, along with the executives in the company and our product manager, we were heavily involved in executing policies that proved that we were being responsible with that data. Information at rest, information in flight, making sure that it was encrypted, making sure that only the right people had access to that data. So kind of a crash course about 7 or 8 years ago into understanding how to secure data, understanding how to write policy, run those by attorneys and other professionals, understanding how to build procedures. And as we did this, it became evident that there just weren't many tools to help with this. There's Word, there's Excel spreadsheets, there's email, there's Dropboxes to put artifacts in, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But it became very difficult to migrate from our baseline, which was HIPAA, right, which doesn't have a lot of guidance. It kind of says, hey, these things are important and you figure out how to do it for yourself. But we found that our policies became pretty ugly pretty quickly as we added on SOC 2 or as we added on high trust. There's a lot of duplication of language across these policies. So this whole idea of being able to have a single policy that can reference outside frameworks, right? Like HIPAA High Trust. You may have governmental, HIPAA is a good example of something that's handed down by the government, whereas SOC 2 and High Trust are more independent. And so, yeah, that's really, in a nutshell, kind of my how I went from software development and architecture into compliance and the struggles that I sort of faced early on with that.
I think it's so interesting sometimes when hearing these stories that there are so many, particularly of us who are a little bit older, that we kind of fell into security in a way. Or in my case, I think I was dragged into it kicking and screaming because I didn't want to do it.
Well,
I'm a networking person myself, but
yeah, so
um,
we're of the same cloth in that respect.
yes, definitely. Well, so standard question, always like to ask people because I want to get their opinion, is what would you think would be right now? And it seems like that the threat environment's constantly changing, but what would be one significant threat to small and mid-sized businesses as far as cybersecurity is concerned?
I feel like social engineering and phishing is the number one. It's the easiest attack vector.
Hmm.
The ability to obtain somebody's credentials and you know the only good well, that plus the MFA hacks that you're seeing
Hmm.
with SMS and text messaging, because it's really easy to tell a Verizon representative that, hey, my SIM card's wrong. And if you just have the code to get, whatever that security code is, the 4 digits or 6 digits that you give to Verizon, if an attacker has that because they've socially engineered you, they can now move that SIM card to their phone. They can receive your MFA text if you're using that instead of an authenticator. And now they have access to everything, even your MFA, which I consider to be really a solid way to secure your resources. They can then have free reign to everything. So, in my mind, 2FA over SMS is the single greatest threat. The idea that people think that that's safe.
Right, I would agree too. And you mentioned social engineering and phishing, and curious with the proliferation of artificial intelligence. I'm thinking Chat GPT right now. We're starting to see that being used to create and enhance phishing campaigns.
Mhm.
You see some sort of a issue with there that this is just going to get worse.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, there are people who are forming relationships with AIs. As crazy as that may seem, you have people who may not have a broad social network, and they begin to interact with AIs in ways where that AI knows who they are, and they essentially have a relationship, for lack of a better word, with this. And there's really nothing stopping from a bad player from using that, against somebody, and then being able to use that information to for financial gain or whatever they like. Yeah.
That's a really good point, and one I hadn't considered. I did this past Friday. I did a on the wrap up episode. One of the articles that talked about was about knowing the identity of the type of identity of the thing that you're interacting with. And so you had these three. You had carbon-based units, which, going back to Star Trek, that's us.
Right.
You have silicon, which would be things like the phone, and then you have artificial intelligence, which could basically mask themselves as just about anything. And I think it's a serious concern. And I want to pivot now. We talked a little bit about compliance and policies and all that. I want to pivot a little bit towards. Um, I sometimes think that anything. artificial intelligence related is going to be something that we have to look at from a policy perspective for all organizations, whether it's large organizations or small. Um, since policies are your strong point here, what are your thoughts on that? Do we need to really call out stuff like Chat GPT and other AI platforms in corporate policies?
I haven't put a lot of time and effort into that angle. We are looking right now at having ChatGPT write procedures and kind of the meaningful tasks. What I've sort of discovered through ChatGPT, and is maybe not the definitive guide, but I feel like the people who know how to ask the best questions are going to be able to harness ChatGPT the best. We've taken advantage. We take it for granted the fact that we have had calculators for 40, 50 years. It's probably longer than that, but essentially we don't really care what the answer to two large numbers are. I mean, we don't have to write that out. We haven't had to write that out for years, but we do have to know what numbers to put into the equation in order to get the correct answer. And I really feel like ChatGPT is the language equivalent of a calculator. Now, of course, numbers we can verify. We know that we could go back and check to see if those two numbers are true or not. When you get into language, it's a little more esoteric, determining what the truth is, or which facts are the right facts. And one thing about ChatGPT, I've got a little bit of a tangent here, sorry, but one thing about ChatGPT is when it's wrong, it's confidently wrong, and so it becomes very difficult to figure out, well, do I accept that or not? It still needs human involvement to solve the problem. I'm not sure I have a great answer. I would say the answer is a yes. We do need policy around interaction with ChatGPT, but I haven't put much thought into what that would be.
I haven't either. I'm just starting to think about that, because I think that it's something I think that needs to be addressed. And to your point, yeah, the asking of the questions is critical. Garbage in, garbage out applies whether you're talking about numbers or questions, I would suppose. But um, what does I'm kind of stuck on the policy thing, so let's go back to
Yeah.
PolicyCo. What is, like, if you were to give a succinct description on how you help small and mid-sized businesses with PolicyCo, what would that be? And are you limited just to healthcare, or are we talking across the broad spectrum of business verticals?
Yeah, well, obviously, healthcare is where I started with this, but we quickly realized that this is a common problem across healthcare, across banking, across really any company that needs to maintain policy and needs to make sure that their policy either follows federal regulations, state regulations, that sort of thing. But you know, I just had a lot of problems early on looking at policy as a linear document, right? This idea that policy is a page of data doesn't quite fit because each paragraph in a policy speaks to a slightly different concept. You may have a policy that generally talks about networking, but there's a lot of aspects of networking that you need to make sure you cover. And so trying to footnote pieces of regulations in various paragraphs of a policy is a problem because it's not relational, right? The minute you need to try to reference that in some way, try to reference, let's say you're looking at SOC 2, and you've got a certain control in SOC 2. If you just footnote it in your Word document, it's not really a living document. You can't get to the definition of that. You can't. Also, it becomes very difficult uh, to handle like a situation where you've got. Um, sorry, my brain just. It becomes very difficult to handle a situation where you may have more than one control linked to a given article, or you may have a many-to-many relationship of these things.
Hmm.
And also, when the auditor comes along, if you can't present the information by flipping the hierarchy to what the auditor cares about, then you have a huge presentation problem. So, for example, an auditor might come and ask you about a suite of SOC controls, and now you're stuck in a situation of delivering all the policies to them and having them search for those SOC controls across your policies. Well, it's a lot more efficient instead to present the SOC controls in order, and then reference the articles that those are in, the policies those are in, the procedures that relate to those, and the evidence and control tests that relate to those. So by creating a relational structure, you 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 just make it easier across the board.
Do you do that by creating? Okay, so I'm going to take an example. I'm kind of stuck on. Let's just say we're talking SOC 2 and HIPAA high trust. So in order to meet HIPAA, this group wants to be high trust certified. They're going to go and get a high trust audit against the high trust CSF. I think I have that right. And they're already SOC 2. They've had their attestation for SOC 2. You're almost like duplicating everything with each of the auditors independently, unless you have some sort of a merge between the two. I think that's what you're talking about as far as the relationship goes. From a simplistic level, I always think about controls in that sense, not like SOC 2 and high trust controls, but corporate controls that, if written correctly, can map to each of those frameworks. Is that pretty much where you're going? That's sort of an idea, or am I off
Yeah.
base?
Yeah, you say corporate controls, I call them articles, but some people call them internal controls and external controls, right? A SOC 2 might be an external control, and then your internal control, as you refer to it, might be your policy on that. So a good example is, information at rest, right? We have a commitment as an organization that all information, regardless, is always encrypted at rest.
Mm-hmm.
So high trust has a number of controls that speak to that. SOC 2 has a number of controls that speak to that. HIPAA has federal regulations that speak to that. So, build your single internal control, that article, once with your broad intent, and then link SOC, link high trust, link HIPAA to anything that relates to that one article. So now what you've done is you've sort of normalized your language so that it is all encompassing for the various frameworks. And then if later you want to become NIST certified, well, NIST has some things you could link to that too. And it might require a slight change to your internal control to also adhere to NIST, but now you're only managing one internal control to adhere
Right.
to all the external controls, right?
So how does PolicyCo help with this regard? Because I will say, having done the virtual CISO stuff for some time now, and prior to that, in corporate environments, we were always beholden to more than one. What's the secret sauce? I mean, not without getting into secrets, but what is the
Yeah.
benefit? How does it work?
Well, step one is stop using Microsoft Word and Google Docs to craft your policies, because they're not the appropriate tool. Not because they're bad tools. I use them all the time.
But you can't link.
But you can't connect things. So that's step one, is and then also you really need a champion within the organization that understands the nature of this problem. Because I remember very clearly when I first got into writing policy, I didn't, if someone had pitched me on the idea of PolicyCo, when I first started writing, I would have said, well, I can just put this in Word document. It's not a problem. But any company that even becomes remotely complex, they don't realize the problems they're going to face until they get into the problem. And especially when you start adding a secondary framework, right? If you just have HIPAA and that's all you're ever going to do, then put it in Word. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you need to normalize your policy across unknown future potential regulations, requirements, then you really need a framework to do that. So yeah, step one is think of policy as articles, not as policy or internal controls, as you state. It's really important that for each article you have an audit trail. I'm going to edit this article. I'm going to have it reviewed by a manager. I'm going to approve that article. Okay, great. Now you've distilled this down to something very manageable at the article level. Now let's look at all those approved articles that have happened in, say, the last month, and let's pull them together, and let's come out with a release candidate for that policy. All right, now we have a release candidate. Board can look at it if they need to. Manager and any other stakeholders can look at it. Then we can set a release date. Doesn't have to be today. It could be for 2 months from now, to say that this is going to be, our new truth in 2 months. And then also that release gets stamped. It's in stone, right? No one could go back and edit it. There's a very clear auditable process of who did what when. And as a developer, this rings very true, right? When we release new code for a website, we write that code. It goes into GitHub. Git looks at the differences. There are approvals. There are people who make sure that it's good, and then it's released. So the idea is sort of it's a soft approach to a software release process, right? We obviously none of the difficult commands or those sorts of things, but something that is a very clear that people can see. Okay, this is what we did. This is why we did it. This is when we did it.
Would it benefit a business? Let's just say you have a business that's starting. They don't really have a really mature security program yet. They've got the basics of it. They kind of know what's confidential and what isn't. They have some practices, but nothing really documented. And they're thinking about, well, at some point in time, we might want to do a SOC 2. Would it make sense for them, instead of to write I'm going to use your nomenclature here, their articles directly relevant to the SOC 2, that they make it maybe a little bit more high level, with the idea that down the road they may also want to, if they take credit cards, for example, they may want to be PCI compliant as well too, and be audited.
Definitely. High Trust recently said, hey, if your policies are basically just a regurgitation of our controls, we have a problem with that. So it really is just not good form to write your policies strictly to the control framework that you're trying to adhere to. So yeah, definitely.
Very good. And that's what I've always thought as well too. So, but I know that there are some organizations where they'll just take like you said, they'll take High Trust, they'll kind of massage it around a little bit, and that's their policy right there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know from experience, being a small business owner and myself, and also having been in cyber and IT for a few years, we won't say how many, but it's been a few.
It's okay.
You have to sometimes step away, and there are healthy ways to step away, and there are sometimes unhealthy ways to step away. But I think you need to step away. Otherwise, the most unhealthy thing that you can do is just be having this churn in your head 24/7 by 365. Bill, what's one of the things that you do to decompress and get away from the stresses of cyber?
Yeah, well, in the middle of the day, if I have a break between meetings, I'll take 30 minutes to practice bass. I call it my COVID instrument. I picked it up at the beginning of COVID. I've been playing guitar for a long time, but and I'm average to below average guitar player, but I decided that I tend to listen to the bass line in songs, and I needed to pursue it. So I've been playing and practicing pretty aggressively for about the last 2 or 3 years now. And it's nice. That's a 30, 45-minute break in the middle of the day just to clear my head.
Is that your bass behind you there, sticking out
It
above
is.
your shoulder?
Yeah. Just a standard P bass.
So it's actually
nothing
like
fancy.
right there, so that like if you want to start diddling on it, you can.
Just
Now,
pick
see,
it up. And, yeah.
I taught myself rhythm guitar on an acoustic, and also a little electric, like many moons ago. And I haven't played in ages, but I keep on telling myself that maybe if I just bring it here and put it where the stuffed dog is, and get the stuffed dog out of the way there, it's like it'll be right behind my shoulder, and then I'd have the impetus to go and work on it. But I know it's like, I don't know if
it's a great idea. Yeah.
It's what is it? The road to somewhere is paved with great ideas and great intentions, or whatever. It's like, I just haven't seemed to get around to it. So, all right. Well, wonderful. Future plans, either for you, for music, for PolicyCo?
PolicyCo, we're just building organically, slowly, adding features as people need it. We're coming out with attestations here, which is something that's been requested by a lot of clients. So This is the ability when you release a policy to gather signatures, track those signatures. And in terms of me personally, I'm definitely interested in any type of technology that helps make the planet a better place. Very interested in delivery of water, desalinization, and just general, just interesting, unique technologies that take things that we've done in the past and sort of flip them on their head and say, oh, well, look at the types of efficiencies we can get by doing the same things we've been doing, but in a slightly different way. So,
That sounds like a very deep question for Chat GPT-4.
right. Yeah.
So,
What should I do?
well, very good. Listen, Bill, it's been amazing. I've totally enjoyed our conversation. Fascinating stuff. I wish that we had more time to talk about PolicyCo. But before I drop, what's the website? Where can they go to learn more?
Yeah, policyco.io.
That's pretty easy to even I can remember that. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, stay secure.